Hello and welcome to the Cambridge Skeptics live stream. The Cambridge Skeptics are a volunteer organization. We are dedicated to promoting critical thinking, science, and positive skepticism in our local community of Cambridge, but also across the UK and beyond. And speaking of the beyond, tonight we have a very seasonally appropriate topic to discuss. And Chris, you are Andrew, I love what you've got there. Chris, you're going to introduce the topic for us.
Yeah, so I've spoken before about how I used to have a number of unusual beliefs. And there's an idea that the people who believe strange things are sort of anti-science. But I don't think that was true in my case. I thought what I believed in was science. It turns out it wasn't. I had completely misunderstood what science was and how science worked. But I sort of accepted certain, what we would now call pseudoscientific theories about ghosts. And I've drawn up a list of some of the theories I used to believe, and I wanted to sort of run through them with you all and sort of get your feedback on them. So let me know, is this science or pseudoscience? First of all, I guess we should start off with the traditional spiritualist view of ghosts. So the idea that ghosts are the apparitions of disincarnate spirits unable to transition to the afterlife. This isn't a belief I ever personally held, but it is a popular one. So I was wondering, what's your take on the sort of traditional spiritualist view of ghosts?
Wait, is it science or is it not science?
It's definitely not science at this
point.
Right, I was like,
yeah.
Although there is scientific evidence for it, so perhaps I should tell you about that.
Yeah.
So there's Dr. Gertrude Schmeidler, who I'm sure you're all familiar with.
Amazing name.
She came up with the Schmeidler method. Her theory, her method was you would go to a site of a haunting, and you would get the people who had experiences there to mark on a map or a plan where they had those experiences. And she would then get a group of mediums or spiritualists, and a group of skeptics, and she would get them to wander around the location with the plan, marking down where they thought these experiences might have happened, where they sort of felt something strange.
In the neighborhood?
And she found that the psychics and the mediums did significantly better than the skeptics in identifying the same locations. So.
Okay. Well, I'm convinced. Should we call it a night?
That's QED, guys. We got it. Go surreal. But like, I feel like guessing what locations somebody would find creepy, if you're not blinded to the creepiness factor, then you're likely to refer on the same location, right?
So why would psychics do better than skeptics?
Because they're
skeptics would say zero.
There's that, but also, if you say never, then you're wrong all of the times where there's something
wrong.
Well, yeah. But also, the psychics of mediums presumably are searching, tuning into the same senses. I imagine if you took a skeptical debunker or skeptical magician like your Penn and Tellers or your Randys, they would be able to go, oh yeah, there. That's where people are going to feel it, because that's, being sort of presenters, entertainers, they would know what would work, and also being, experienced debunkers, they would sort of have their eyes open for what would likely sort of set people off.
Yeah, I think that's a fair thing. Yeah, there's probably certain factors that sort of make you more likely to experience something or see something.
Yeah, but like if I'm like a tooth fairy skeptic and I like want to guess which households the tooth fairy is likely to visit tonight, my answer will be zero. Because
are you a tooth fairy skeptic?
I mean, I am a skeptic in terms of our definition of a skeptic.
But I guess
Therefore, that includes understanding that the tooth fairy is not real. But if I was, part of Big Tooth Fairy, I would be like, well, who has a 6-year-old in their house with a wobbly tooth? Right. I'm going to guess that they might have a tooth fairy visit. So I'm guessing that would be, that would correlate with some kind of ground truth. But
if you're like a believer in the paranormal and things, and you're like, well, okay, ghosts occur where there's a cold spot or where there's a lack of iron or something. I don't know.
But skeptics know these things. So.
Maybe, but I mean, it depends what they mean by skeptics. I mean, do they mean just people who don't believe in ghosts, or people who are?
I think it was just people who don't believe in ghosts rather than. Yeah. I think it was just people that don't believe in ghosts.
So people who do believe in ghosts and who are they're more likely to have a knowledge of where ghosts are meant to appear, and so more rightly identify the spots that correspond with.
Assuming ghosts appear in the places they're meant to appear.
Well, yes. No, yeah. But if there's a legend that ghosts always appear near a window in an east wall, I don't know. If you know that, and that's what other people have said about ghosts, then you're more likely to identify that spot than someone who doesn't know that.
Or I'm like many people of my demographic, like I'm interested in murder mysteries and like reading. And I'm also interested in skeletons, but separately. But like, so,
it's like demographics supposed to be archaeologists.
I meant like females of any age, really. So like maybe I would read a like creepy path between two buildings differently than someone who isn't into murder mysteries. And if you were asking me the question of like, where was the dead body found, I might, as a like person who watches a lot of like murder mystery shows, I might be able to guess the location of that better than somebody who watches superhero movies, just as a random example.
Yeah, I mean, expectation does seem to play a huge part in it. There's a study by Lang and Horan where they took two groups into an abandoned theatre, and they told one group it was being renovated, and they told the other group it was haunted. And the group that were told it was haunted reported back more experiences than the group that was told it was being renovated. So yeah, expectation does seem to be a big part of it.
Was it being renovated by ghosts?
Renovation itself seems to kick up a lot of ghosts. So.
I realise I'm going off track a little bit, but active old people homes and hospitals surely have had an enormous number of dead people in it relatively recently. Surely that's where all the ghosts should be. Like going to a castle hundreds of years old nobody's lived in for ages. Surely the ghosts have gotten bored and wandered off at that point. Like they don't stick around forever. Like humans have been around for what, depending on your definition, 202 million years. Like, should we be chock full of ghosts? No, they have to like.
There is a shocking lack of Neanderthal ghosts in the reciting record.
Yeah, but like they have to go away at some point. Like I know there's supposed to be this sort of soul that's stuck on this side, but at some point they're supposed to get closure and move on, and that's all very nice for them. But surely on a reasonable time frame, that then means that like the most active places should be the ones with like currently active places should be the ones with all the ghosts in it. But you rarely hear people going, oh, I saw Bill, he died in the ER last week, but there he was, also wandering around the ER.
Well, don't people see that though, or claim to see that?
I mean, they're already there for medical reasons. Like,
oh, I see.
Yeah, testimony is not.
Yeah. Okay. So, one of the big issues a lot of the researchers seem to have with the traditional spiritualist view is that ghosts have clothes. Does this mean that clothes have some sort of soul that lives on?
Or is the ghost a mental representation of what you were like in life, and so the soul imagines what it looked like in life, and it doesn't want to be wandering around in the buff.
So yes, so that sort of takes us nicely on to the next theory. So a lot of early work on this was done by the Society of Psychical Research, which was founded by a group of ex-Trinity College graduates in London in the late 19th century. And they put together a research project where they went and collected as many different reports as they could of these sort of things. And they came to the conclusion that ghosts were in fact telepathic projections from living people. So your memory of your grandmother gets projected into somebody else's mind, and they see your grandmother as you would have seen her with her normal clothes and whatever else.
If that's the case, surely they don't believe in any kind of deeply historical ghosts. You're going to get not going to get any ghosts from the 17th century because
no one remembers them.
So most of their research at the time was on living ghosts, so the ghosts people see of other living people. So the idea you could project a ghost of yourself somewhere, or someone could project a ghost of you, of someone they know.
That's weird.
Are they saying that the people who are projecting these ghosts are like doing it on purpose? So
no, this is
okay.
There has been some people who have claimed to be able to do it on purpose.
So
there's two, but there's two natural like extensions from that, which is one that if someone that is heavily in the mind of someone else could be projected. And therefore, why has there not been hundreds of reports of Trump ghosts over the last 5 years?
Oh.
Yeah, I know.
I got a shiver.
Jeez. But also, like, does it have to be a real person, or why then would that explain why there are so many? Well, I say so many. There are like Jesus ghosts. People are like, oh yeah, I know what Jesus is like.
So yeah, I mean, apparitional experiences also includes sightings of Jesus and the Virgin Mary, and some people even bring aliens and things into this, so they could be the unrealistic ones you're talking about.
So, yeah, I feel like I'm not understanding this, because so you're saying that I have a picture in my head of my mum, for example, and I transmit that into Erica's head somehow.
And then Erica will see. So
I don't do it consciously.
No.
Do I have to be there?
No, you can do it over a distance.
I can do it over a distance.
So the thing is, this idea comes into her head, and she doesn't know how to deal with it. So her subconscious creates this projection, this hallucination that takes the thing you've projected into her mind and presents it to her as something real and visual she can see.
Okay. so it strikes me that this is somewhat unfalsifiable, because because we're saying in this case that these are, like you said, living ghosts. These are people. So let's say Erica, I don't think has ever met my mum, but let's say Erica did know my mum.
Oh, or have I?
Have you? Yes. Is she behind?
What was she doing
now?
last night?
But what?
This has gone somewhere strange.
Yeah, that derailed me a bit. So because I'm not aware of doing this, you can't say, well, okay, at 9 o'clock, Andrew was thinking very hard about projecting the thought of his mum into Erica's brain, and she saw it. Therefore, that's something. So you can rule out that sort of thing. And if Erica knows my mum and thinks she sees my mum, but doesn't, there's a completely natural explanation for that. She saw something, she was mistaken. I don't even understand how this gets off the ground as an idea. Yeah.
So I guess some of these hallucinations are able to provide information that Erica wouldn't know. So Erica could say, "Your mum says the will is hidden in the Bible" or something, and then she can communicate that back to you, and you find out it's true.
But in this case, can the apparition impart any information that the person that is projecting them into the other person's head knows?
Or does
if Andrew, well, that's it.
So Andrew would have to know it, yeah.
Yeah.
okay. But that then prevents the testing of the theory by like then the ability for the apparition to say anything that isn't already known.
Yes. Although maybe he only subconsciously knows it.
Yes.
Maybe it's a repressed memory.
Maybe.
Oh goodness, yes, it's a repressed memory of my mum.
Of your
telling me
mother.
where the will is. Yeah. So I told Erica. Okay. Okay.
So what presumably the biggest problem with this is that it relies on telepathy, which is unproven. And
yes, that's the right way of saying it.
I'm surprised no one picked up on this. Do you not remember Occam? We talked about this.
Well, there's a bunch of problems with it. We weren't being credulous this whole time.
So yeah, it relies on the idea of telepathy, which, despite lots of research, has yet to be proven. And some of the great parapsychologists, such as J.B. Rhine, just refused to investigate ghosts until you were able to eliminate the telepathy as a plausible mechanism. Right, I'll move on to the next one. So this is also from early members of the SPR, particularly Edmund Gurney and Eleanor Sidgwick. And they sort of came up with this trace hypothesis. So Sidgwick felt that maybe there was something about the place itself. You know, these ghosts don't appear everywhere. They seem to be location specific. And so Sidgwick and Gurney just sort of said there must be something about the place that causes them to appear constantly in the same place. And H.H. Price, the Welsh philosopher, he came up with this idea that that memories could become detached from your mind and become part of the psychic ether and attach themselves to a particular place. And so if you had a mind that was susceptible to these, you would wander into this place and you would be able to pick up this particular memory. This comes from an idea originally put forward by Charles Babbage, the father of computing. And he felt, because of vibrations, that every word we ever say exists somewhere in this ether as a continuing vibration that can be maybe pulled back at some point somehow.
But I noticed that if you're susceptible to them, which again completely prevents skeptics from being from testing this. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, not everyone sees ghosts.
I mean, I suppose if we sort of take that at face value, obviously some people are more susceptible to some things than others. You know, it's the concept on its face isn't completely ridiculous. The idea that some people might be able to detect something that most people can't is reasonable. And I suppose if you were to say it's, you know, there's certain sounds in this area that some people can detect, so like voices or that are so soft that other people can't detect them, that's okay. But the idea obviously that someone in the past years ago said something and that noise is still somehow
resonating
around.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I suppose there is an element of that. You could probably argue that there could be some atoms that are still vibrating from a sound that took place some period ago, and we just have nothing sensitive enough to pick it up. But
Caesar's last breath, it's still floating around somewhere.
Yeah. Carry on with the details.
So the person most associated with this theory is a guy called T.C. Lethbridge. T.C. Lethbridge he studied archaeology at Trinity. I don't know why everyone seemed to go to Trinity.
Is Trinity full of ghosts?
Yes.
Well, Lethbridge's interest in ghosts started at Trinity. one day he was looking out of the window of his rooms and he saw someone in a top hat, and he realized it wasn't Sunday. So the only reason someone could be in a top hat would be that they would be a ghost.
No.
I'm convinced.
No.
I would like to say it was a different time back then, but I'm pretty sure Trinity College is pretty much the same now. So yeah, Lethbridge was actually a fairly well-respected archaeologist for a while. He was keeper of Anglo-Saxon antiquities at the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology here in Cambridge. It's a bit of a diversion, but I find this guy fascinating. But he basically sabotaged his own career. He went up into Wandlebury Hills with an iron rod, and he started sticking it into the ground to work out where the soft bits were.
Which, like, depending on the era, may have been a legitimate.
Was it? Okay.
And what was the weather like?
I think he did this over a period of time. I'm not sure. So
okay. Sorry, this wasn't like he went out with an iron rod in the middle of a thunderstorm and was just stabbing things at the top of a hill.
It was holding there, going, "All gods are bastards," and he made a discovery. So what he did is, when he found the soft bits, he had the turf lifted up to reveal the chalk underneath, and he was able to eventually reveal these astounding Iron Age chalk figures of a warrior, a mother god, and something else I don't remember. So he found these chalk figures of three gods in the. Why are we turning our heads? Yeah.
Are they?
I'm trying to see either of those three. So which one's the warrior?
I couldn't figure it out myself.
I've never heard of this before.
So yeah, he published this and faced ridicule and eventually lost his position.
Might be why I never heard of it.
Yeah. So yeah, this actually brings up one of the real possible explanations for ghosts, which is, of course, pareidolia, the brain's ability to see figures where none exist, which Lethbridge was obviously quite accomplished at. But yeah, okay, so after he left the Museum of Anthropology and Archaeology, he sort of went full woo. He started doing archaeology with a dowsing rod, and he bought into ancient aliens and
the cards.
Where's he go?
And he sort of built up this theory that you could leave some sort of impression on the landscape that would later be picked up by people who were susceptible. And this was of course famously picked up by wow, I was going blank. The Nigel Neal, creator of Quatermass, for a Christmas ghost story called The Stone Tape, and he threw away all this history and thought behind it and just came up with the idea, you can probably record ghosts in rocks.
Obviously, like, with our understanding of like physics and brains today, we know that this is like complete, there's no plausible mechanism for this. But like back then they were like, oh, by the way, did you know about electrons? And like, surprise, there's all of these crazy things happening in like quantum mechanics. And like, did you know that light is both a wave and a particle? So like you can imagine in this brave new world, they're like, hey, who knows? Like, I had this like shiny rock and it turns out it gave me cancer. Like, who knows what the world can do?
Yeah, I mean, and there's no reason why, they thought they were doing science at the time.
Yeah, that was my Mary Curie impression, by the way.
That was brilliant.
Oh,
Yeah,
spot on.
I thought her ghost was here.
Her accent's disappeared. She was Polish, wasn't she?
Polish, yeah.
Everyone knows that ghosts all sound Canadian. So yeah, it's an established fact.
And they all speak whatever the recipient's language is.
Yeah.
Perfectly.
Oh yeah, so
we're taking it completely seriously, Chris. Don't worry.
I can tell. Yeah. So yeah, there's the idea that you can record things into stone. Quartz and iron are particularly popular, apparently. that can be later replayed. And this is still a popular theory with many ghost hunting societies around the country.
You make them sound like they're like societies of like the Amazon, or like, you know, the distant reaches of Indonesia. There are these societies out there that hunt ghosts, but no, we mean like clubs of people in like Berkshire. Yeah.
I don't know how much quartz there is in Berkshire, but
there'll be some.
That's all right.
So yeah,
quartz is pretty cool. Like, it's a crystal and it does trap energy. Like, but just like
wait, you're saying this is possible?
Yeah, well, so like these people coming up with these theories, they are, you know, especially the era that they're in with the sort of understanding of science at the time. Like, if I told you that I can tell you how old, when a
we're into the 1970s now, by the way.
Oh, hang on. Okay, but if I told you that we can tell when a grain of sand was last buried, based on the buildup of energy in the crystal structure of the quartz, like that's a similar, you know, level of like, wow, what do you mean? But there's a really plausible mechanism there, which is that the quartz crystal, I think it possibly it's due to impurities in the crystal structure, or possibly due to the crystal structure itself. I'm unclear, but it can trap photons in, like, you know, that are just like bumming around. It can trap them in sort of these defects in the crystal structure, and if it is exposed to a certain amount of energy, these trapped particles, trapped photons can get released, and they kind of get jiggled out of their place again by being exposed to a certain amount of energy. And it turns out all that's needed is just like exposure to daylight is enough to do that. So when these quartz crystals are sitting around being exposed to daylight, they're like, doop-de-doo, my traps are all empty. And then they get buried, and the, you know, photon, I don't even know if it's photons anymore. This is how long it's been. Anyways, particles are getting built up. And these, I did not think I'd be talking about thermoluminescence dating tonight, but they get trapped in the quartz crystals, and over time, it happens at a known rate. And so over time, you can work out when the last time it was buried based on what's the accumulation of energy in these trapped crystals. Like, listen, this is how much I don't understand it anymore. That it sounds like I'm talking to you about energy and crystals, but it's totally scientific. There was a lab in the basement of the university where I did my PhD, where they totally did this. It had to be in complete darkness because any light would obviously like ruin the measurements that they were taking. So
dark basement full of crystals. Got it. Okay.
Full of crystals. And they
what university was this?
It was totally legitimate when I promised.
Was it Trinity?
It was not Trinity. But then you'd have to get into the lab by going in these like Batman tubes, because it had to be completely sealed in blackness. And the best part,
did you have to wear a top hat?
You did not. You had to wear like full on hazmat stuff, because of like quartz crystals, which are like glass, like very like hard rock crystals, because they had to like clean kind of the outsides off of them in order to like sort of like remove any like fuzziness around kind of the measuring of these trapped particles, which I don't remember what they are. They would have to, like, they would use an acid to etch the sides of the crystals off, grains of sand, right? And the acid that they used was hydrofluoric acid, which is a super dangerous acid because it doesn't, you don't feel the pain in the same way that you would with another acid, because it interferes with like calcium reception in your body. And it also like burns through your bone faster than it burns through your skin. And it's really, really nasty. And anyone who like ever is at risk of coming in contact with HF has to like carry a card in their wallet to go straight to the hospital with. I had to do this, not in that lab, in a different lab. Anyways, crystals and energy, that's my topic. Done.
So when it traps these photons to later release them, can they be in human form?
No, they cannot. They are in their original form.
So it couldn't be a ghost then. It wasn't.
No.
Okay, that's a pity.
It is.
Right. What's next? Okay. So moving on. So mainly we've been looking at ghosts, but I also want to tackle poltergeist a bit.
What's the difference? There's a difference.
So poltergeist can move things.
I feel like I need to look up the etymology of this real quick. Go on.
Noisy spirits from the German, I believe. So yeah, they're able to move and manipulate objects, whereas traditional ghosts can't. If you see a ghost closing a door, once the hallucination is gone, the door will still be open as it was before the hallucination. But poltergeists can actually physically interact with the environment. One of the traditional spiritualist ideas about this was that they could produce ectoplasm.
It's not my favorite substance.
Is that? Yeah. We clean our cats when they get
when they get ectoplasm on them.
Well, I was going to say when they roll around in slugs, which from my understanding is relatively similar. Or actually,
is your understanding from the film Ghostbusters?
Yes, it was. That's what I was about to say. Like, what's the general understanding of ectoplasm? Though?
Yeah.
So I went to the SPR archives at Cambridge University, where they were able to show me some ectoplasm that had been produced during a séance 100 years ago or something.
Oh.
And it looked like cheesecloth to me.
Surprising.
Was it on cheesecloth?
It was just very thin fabric that you could secrete somewhere and produce during a séance.
Okay. But there's no like bricks of it that are large and clunky and difficult to hide and on the body.
The pictures you often see of like people doing these things where they produce ectoplasm, it's just like they've got a sheet hanging out their mouth or something like that. It's
or some other orifice if you look at some of the other stories.
Oh, no.
It's very, very odd because it's not. I mean, like the Ghostbusters thing, you have this sort of fluid and stuff, and it's sort of but it's very much a sheet type thing. It's very much a cloth like when you see the pictures.
When you see the real stuff.
When you see the real stuff, yeah, of course, yes. Let's see if we can find something.
Well, apparently the etymology is that it's from plasm, from the Greek plasma, meaning something formed, and the Greek root ecto just means like outside of, like exit, external, that whole root. So no clue in the name.
So yeah, we've moving on from the spiritualist view. Guy W. Lambert, who was also part of the SPR, came up with a theory that maybe the reason these objects move was because of underwater hydraulic pressures. So underground river under your house may cause certain bursts of hydraulic pressure that would shake your house and move your objects. He did some research into this, and he found out that the vast majority of poltergeist cases occur within a few miles of tidal or underground water, and they are more common in wet and wintry months.
Huh. What about in houses with cats? I feel like that's also very with poltergeist.
That could explain a lot.
Yeah. Since getting cats, I no longer get concerned if I hear a noise in the house that's unexplained. I'm like, let's assume it was the cats and go back to bed.
That's what they want you to think.
Yeah.
Cats or the...
It's all a conspiracy with cats.
So yeah, this
on the internet,
piece of evidence. This idea that most cases occur within a few miles of tidal or underground water was something I found very persuasive back when I was a believer. One of the big issues with it is most population in this country lives within a couple of miles of tidal or underground water.
Most dead people are found where the living are. So yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought we lost you there.
Oh yeah, that's a bit of an issue. Have you? Am I still here?
No, you're still here.
It's a bit slow.
Okay, good. Okay, so a couple of researchers from the SPR, Gould and Cornell, based here in Cambridge, decided to put this to the test. So they got Cambridge Council to give them a condemned council house. They placed 13 objects strategically around the house, and then they attached heavy machinery to the outside of the house to shake it.
Okay.
Good stuff,
Yeah,
Paul.
well, if it's
Actually,
condemned, that's
I mean-
going to happen anyway.
Did they win a big Nobel Prize for this? Because this really sounds like
What exactly were
A
they
golden
testing?
Cornell are fantastic to see if movement could cause these objects to strangely move
I
in a way
could
that
have been
wasn't
funding for
detectable.
my research.
Yeah. So the idea that physical movement could cause something to physically move is what they were testing. I don't see
So,
how that
yeah.
supports the idea of ghosts.
So what they did is they found out that before the objects would move, you would notice the vibrations. So the theory was these objects would move without you noticing the vibrations. But they said they noticed you had to turn the vibration up to a point where you could really feel it before
So
anything could even
therefore, poltergeist phenomena
show any
couldn't
sign of
do
movement.
that.
And to get anything like the sort of movement you see in poltergeist phenomenon, you'd have to turn up the shaking to a point where it would destroy the house before you'd notice anything.
Okay, but what about?
So they were able to reject this hypothesis.
Okay, but what about resonance and is it converging waves? Basically, you could have something shaking at a particular frequency. Everything else is completely fine, and then this one thing that just happens to have a resonance with the frequency of the whatever is doing the shaking could then becomes harmonic, and it just gets harder and harder and harder until it falls over or breaks or whatever. That's
So poltergeist reports tend to have multiple objects flowing around the place rather than one object multiple times.
Well, no, it would be one object multiple times, really. You'd have one thing would probably fall over, and then
One thing would do it once. That probably wouldn't get reported.
Sorry.
Is it like have they ever been able to replicate a poltergeist experience in a controlled environment, or is it always witness testimony?
It's always witness testimony.
Well, there you go, folks.
So I think my problem with this is that I'm not sure how it necessarily disproves poltergeists. So
well, no, it disproves the theory that vibrations could.
Yeah, it disproves the theory that poltergeists operate through vibrations, not disproving poltergeists.
No one's saying this disproves poltergeists. No,
it's like I could set up a
webcam. Still got that option.
Like I could set up a webcam at everyone's front door and prove that the tooth fairy isn't arriving through the front door. And therefore I have like disproven that theory, but I have not proved that the tooth fairy exists.
No, yeah, I mean, no. We have no proof for ghosts yet. We just have theories.
Yeah.
And of course, science doesn't actually prove things. You should say it.
That's true.
No, but it can provide enough evidence at which point you can act as if it's proven it.
That's fair.
Okay, so the next guy to have a stab at explaining poltergeist phenomenon, a guy called William G. Roll. He worked for J.B. Rhine up at in Duke University, and he was involved in the Seaford poltergeist case. So there was this poltergeist that was happening around a young boy who's had come from a very unfortunate background. I think his mother had murdered his father or something. Oh. And he'd gone to live with his grandmother, and then these poltergeist activities started happening. And problem with investigation poltergeist was always getting to them in time before they tend to dissipate after a couple of months. So the researchers always had trouble getting them to them in time. But Seaford poltergeist, they got there in time, and they were able to take the boy and his grandmother into the lab to observe them. And while they were observing them, they saw the boy pocket two objects and throw them at his grandmother. They later did a polygraph test on him, and he showed no knowledge of this event ever having taken place, which caused Roll to conclude that these things happen in a dissociative state. No?
No.
He's
No?
lying.
No?
The polygraph test proves nothing. They're not real. I mean, they're real, like they exist, but they don't prove it.
All
Yeah.
they my understanding is all they demonstrate is some level of stress or lack of stress.
And
rather
that-
than
Or maybe
lying
that
or
the
not
kid had no stress over lying. He'd done it
Yeah.
so often. You know, he
It's-
keeps throwing things at his grandmother and then lying about it. You know, you find he's just going to lie about it again. Doesn't feel any stress about it.
So anyway, Roll took this and he built on it, and he realized that if you could do things physically without realizing you were doing them, you could probably do things mentally without realizing you were doing them. So he came up with the theory of recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, the idea that these people had psychokinesis happening to them without their intention.
At which point did he demonstrate that psychokinesis is a thing, let alone doing it unconsciously?
Yeah, that's definitely an issue.
That would also would provide a cover story for psychic mediums, because they, you know, they're making the table shake on their own, but they were not aware that they're doing it, and therefore it's not an example of them lying and being a charlatan. It's an example of still their connection to the spiritual realm.
Well, yeah, what Roll discovered is a lot of these people that suffered from poltergeist in their youth would grow up to become psychics and mediums. So there is definitely a connection between those two things.
I suppose, I mean, okay, let's take it seriously for a second. I suppose there's, obviously I don't think that we're talking about telekinesis and things like that, but I think there's definitely an idea that you can trick yourself, or you can believe something to a point where you don't consider yourself responsible for it.
Yeah.
And I suppose, I mean, if you look at some of the people who are psychics and mediums and that lot, not all of them realize what they're doing. Some of them honestly believe that they are in touch with, you know, the other side or whatever like that, and they've convinced themselves as much as the people they're reading for that this is true. And I think, I mean, the idea that as a child you convince yourself that you're being haunted and stuff like that, and then you go on as an adult to, you know, do things related to something that had a profound effect of you as a child, I think that makes perfect sense to me. I mean, you know, the psychology there is yeah, it makes perfect sense. But it's the telekinesis bit. Is the, you know, I mean, the evidence he had was a kid throwing something at his grandmother. I think there's a bit of a leap from that to telekinesis.
Well, fortunately, you know, this was 58, so he was able to call on quantum.
Awesome! Yay!
Yeah.
So quantum entanglement shows us that two objects can operate. There can be spooky action at a distance, to quote Einstein. So why not?
Is that a legitimate question, or was that a rhetorical question?
That's not how quantum works.
The clue's in the quantum bit, isn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. It's yeah. When we don't have an explanation, just use the word quantum in it.
I think that is in your pseudoscience bingo card.
It is, yes, it is on my pseudoscience bingo card. Yeah. I mean, it's. I mean, I suppose at the time it was that, yeah, like you said, it was they were just finding out about this sort of stuff. There was something definitely weird about it. So why couldn't it explain aspects? I mean, if you're convinced that, you know, things like ghosts exist, then suddenly a whole new branch of science which operates in a way that doesn't seem to fit with what we normally understand. Of course, that makes sense. That could provide an explanation. So I don't want to accuse these people of just going, nobody understands what quantum physics is, we'll just latch onto that as an explanation. But yeah, It's,
yeah, I mean, these were all legitimate theories at the time, I think. Okay, so let's move on to some more current theories. So in the last stream we did with Tom, I spoke about Michael Persinger. So Persinger was American-Canadian professor of psychology, and he did some research, and he noticed there was a correlation between reports of spiritual encounters and geomagnetic activity.
Yeah.
And he followed this up with and this has been followed up with other people who've also found a correlation between the two. And he followed it up with some field research. So he sort of became famous as a sort of for investigating this sort of phenomenon. He got sort of calls out to various hauntings, and he would go out and he would measure the EMF and GMF in the haunted house, or the site of the haunting.
Electromagnetic frequency and what?
Geomagnetic frequency.
Geomagnetic frequency. Got it.
Yeah. And some of it, so the first time he went out there, he found these very complex frequencies going around this couple that were reporting haunting experiences. Next time he went out, he set up some measurements, and he was able to note that a woman who was having haunting experiences woke up at the same time there was a GMF spike in the area. And in another investigation, he went to explore a young girl who was reporting haunting experiences, and he tracked down the EMF frequency coming from her radio clock beside her bed as this same complex pattern that he said was causing these experiences.
So there's nothing wrong with that, like on its own, in terms of like using observational data to form a hypothesis. But if you're not able to reproduce that in a controlled environment, then you can't prove your hypothesis. It's just a weird coincidence.
Well, that's what Tom said last week, but fortunately, he was able to replicate it. But
what?
But
can I replicate it?
Sure, you're Canadian. Why not? Where is it? Yes, you need a skidoo helmet.
Okay. Also very, very Canadian.
I have no idea what that is, but it sounds.
Skidoo is it's a snowmobile. It's a water ski on snow.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Why would you do that? Okay.
Canada.
So yeah, you need a modified skidoo helmet that would create these same frequencies as you can see in this picture.
Does it also make a loud noise when it spools up?
No. From the video footage I've seen, no, it's silent. The magnetic frequencies you're using are so low, they're less than a hairdryer or a fridge magnet.
So, well, I was just thinking, if it is vibrating or making noise or getting hot or cold or anything like that, that could be what is waking up the person, not the.
Well, this is done while you're awake. These experiments in the lab.
Oh.
And what do people report experiencing? So
there's all sorts of different reports. So most people experience some sort of presence. A number of famous skeptics have been through this process. Michael Shermer reported a presence. Susan Blackmore reported her legs being stretched out by an unseen force. And Richard Dawkins reported nothing. He didn't feel anything.
I mean, brains can do weird things.
Yeah,
like I get sleep paralysis quite frequently, especially if I'm napping, and I consistently feel a presence in the room when I have sleep paralysis. Luckily, I'm always like very firmly grounded in reality, so I'm like, oh, I need to get up and go shopping. This is Sam telling me I have to go get up and get shopping. Like, it's always very like reality based, but it would be terrifying if it wasn't. So
yeah, we know the brain can do this, but can these these magnetic frequencies.
There's a plausibility aspect here. So there's obviously something, is transcranial magnetic stimulation is a thing. And they are able to stimulate your brain with magnetic frequencies and can produce all manner of different effects. They can produce out-of-body type experiences, the experiences of being presence, a presence in the room. So there's a plausibility here.
But you don't get that level of magnetism in nature.
No. This is very. They are definitely very much higher levels, and definitely sound much higher than what this helmet thing did. And especially I mean, unless there's something seriously wrong with your alarm clock, it shouldn't be putting out.
But with sort of a natural phenomenon, you assume that there's sort of a range of natural behavior, roughly a normal distribution. So maybe it's that some people are on the more sensitive end. And
one of the things, obviously, with this one is he's very much saying this seems to be an explanation saying ghosts aren't real, the experiences are real, what accounts for them. So rather, the others have all sort of lent towards the okay, ghosts are real, let's explain how ghosts work. Whereas this is people are having an experience, let's explain why they're having an experience. And I think this one sounds, the idea that somehow your brain is being stimulated by the environment you're in via electromagnetism it's plausible. It's I think as you said, the levels of the power levels required to do that don't tend to occur and would probably be noticeable in some other way if they were happening. But
so yeah, to go back to Erica's point, yes, some people, according to Persinger, are more susceptible to this than others, and that's why Dawkins didn't experience anything. He's not susceptible. To go back to Andrew's point, you don't get these levels of magnetism in nature, and as Tom said last week, there is no last stream. There is no known way that the geomagnetic forces he's talking about could disrupt the brain. Persinger's claim is that what happens is our production of melatonin is inhibited, and melatonin sort of prevents epileptic style seizures, and there is a similar correlation noticed between geomagnetic variation and epileptic seizures. So. But yeah, I mean, it's unclear how the mechanism that works here. And there was one attempt to replicate his results. Pierre Granquist in 2005, he borrowed one of Persinger's spare helmets. He observed Persinger in action, and what he noted is that there was no double blinding in Persinger's studies.
I was going to ask about that, yeah.
So when he did his replication, he ensured that it was double blinded and that there was a sham force put on half the participants. And when he did this, he found that the helmet made no difference. People had these experiences whether the helmet was on or off.
Oh, there we go. And that's why we love the scientific method.
Persinger's, of course, rejected Granquist's findings. He says Granquist didn't apply the field long enough, and that he ran his experiment on Windows, which is obviously crazy.
See, this is where like up until this moment, this was like a reasonable scientific endeavor. And then like another scientist came along and was like, oh, I have a way of making your methodology better. Here, let me apply it. Oh, look, I have a significant results in the sense that it is meaningful. And the original researcher was like, no, you're wrong. Instead of like, oh, let me see if I can reproduce your result and figure out what's going on here. So there's clearly some motivated interest happening there.
I think, this is a big issue, lack of replication.
Yeah.
Chris French, who runs the London Skeptics group, has also done a variation on this experiment. And let me see if I can pull up the root of the picture. So he created this room where he would project these EMF fields into the room. So he used the same frequencies and this sort of complex field that Persinger came up with, and he had two projectors and they overlapped in one place and they didn't overlap in another place, and there were other places that were free from the projection. Participants would wander around the room noting down when and where they experienced anything, and yeah, he also found no significant result from the EMF.
Good.
Is this kind of relate? Sorry, going slightly off topic. Is this kind of related to people who claim to be incredibly sensitive to sort of EMF stuff? That they can detect Wi-Fi signals and stuff like that.
I've not seen that come up, but I guess it could be.
Okay. Cool. Sorry, changing the subject.
But like the thing is, so if there was a genuine part of the population, like let's imagine like a bell curve, if there was a genuine part of the population that was extremely sensitive to something, it's really challenging methodologically to distinguish that from p-hacking, to distinguish that from like, oh well, let's just like shave the data in a bunch of ways so that we're only left with this portion of the population, because it could be a real portion of the population, or it could just be imagined responses to real, as just part of a normal distribution. So and we are all guilty of wanting to p-hack our data results. Like there's so much good evidence now in the scientific literature that really like well-trained scientists, well-meaning people were just inherently interested in a good story. And we have to be really, really careful with ourselves all the time.
Well, and we want our work to be significant.
Yeah.
Both statistically and more literally.
Okay. So we've got a couple more to get through. Next theorist I want to talk about is a guy called John Randall, writing in 82, and he came up with the higher dimensions hypothesis. So we're back in the woo territory.
Sounds testable.
So he theorized that there is a fourth spatial dimension and a second time dimension through which beings can move and create these appearances of apparitions. So here he was building on the work of.
Wouldn't one of them have been enough? Oh, sorry.
Both space.
Probably. I don't know. So yeah, here he was building on the work of Frederick Myers, who came up with this idea of a material world beyond our current world, where these beings were able to live and they could physically affect things. And also you can see the influence of Edwin Abbott, the author of Flatland. So I'm going to go to Flatland for my example of this. So in Flatland, Abbott writes about this idea that a three-dimensional object passing through a two-dimensional universe would sort of appear out of nowhere, grow, shrink, and then disappear. Pretty much the same idea as apparitions seem to have.
Not provable.
Okay.
And why would it be correlated with being dead? Wouldn't we just like random fruits passing through?
Maybe there isn't a correlation with being dead. Like I said, a lot of the early work was on living spirits. So.
How on earth?
I feel like I'm missing the connection. So basically, his idea is that there is this other realm that.
Other dimensions.
Okay, and that sometimes they pass
through our dimension,
and that people are aware of them.
Yeah.
So obviously,
but not everyone, not all the time.
Not everyone, and not all the time. So
for some reason, only people that are really into seeing them can see them.
There seems to me that this is something that is inherently untestable. I mean, how do you create a test to make beings from another dimension pass through your recording apparatus at a given moment?
Are you wielding
So-
Newton's laser sword on this one?
Yes.
But also, I mean, I thought our understanding of dimension, like, forget flatland, it's made up. The nature of, like, my understanding of our nature is that if there were more dimensions, we'd be able to move and perceive them to a great extent, unless they're either too large or too small for us to possibly for them to work on our level, at which point they also wouldn't be responsible for things moving and operating at our level. Like, no, am I going to
Well,
wacky?
and like Sheldon in the chat mentioned string theory. Like, I thought the
That's
only
what I
like
was-
mathematically plausible way to get extra dimensions
It's
physically
really, really
is having
tiny.
ones.
And they're rotational. Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
I'm meaning. It's like it's not working on our scale.
Yeah,
It's either too large or too small.
it's
for
like
us. It
this
doesn't-
human being is not wafting through a fourth dimension,
Yeah, that's it. Like if it's yeah.
and
President.
it doesn't explain why the things that are wafting are always like dead
Humans.
children and like the murdered
From
ex-wife
the
of
Victorian
the king.
age.
So
Yeah,
what-
yeah.
Like if nothing else, like if you're gonna do if things can move through the extra dimensions, why are there no dinosaur ghosts? Or
I mean,
like
that's the
just
statement.
horses?
That's the quote of the night, Sam.
There
It's
are
like,
horse
why are there
ghosts.
no dinosaurs?
There are definitely horse ghosts.
Not many. And like there's more. Surely there's been more like dinosaurs were around for millions and millions of years before horses came along. Why are there not dinosaur ghosts?
I don't know.
And bees,
Yeah,
like
Chris.
ghost bees, ants.
I
I don't know.
know.
Doesn't make any sense.
Like, yeah, loads of insect ghosts everywhere.
Maybe there are. Have you ever checked your insects to see if they're real?
Maybe
Occasionally.
it requires some kind of level of telekinetic power, in order to project. I don't
Oh,
know,
we'll come to that later. Don't worry.
Oh boy.
Well, dinosaurs
Sorry.
didn't have telekinesis. There you go.
Fish. Like this was underwater long before.
Why are there no ghosts underwater?
No, why are there no ghost fish?
Oh,
running
I see,
around?
like floating around here. If
Yeah.
this particular, well, and then like, is it like our point in time in the like space in the universe? Like,
No, there's one of
we
each.
move
There's one
around in
time
the
and
Milky
one.
Way.
Yes, yes, because of course we're yes. Well, all
Exactly.
Of things are
The-
locally rooted
Yeah, why? Why would they be locally rooted?
because that's what works for their theories.
Okay.
Like yes, we're never occupying the same point in space. Like 10 minutes, like where I am now, in 10 minutes will be just empty space, and we will never return to that spot ever again.
Well, it's all relative.
That's where all the ghost fish are.
Yeah, there you go. Hanging out in empty space.
Okay. Quick refresher. Back to something a little more serious. Okay, so Vic Tandy, IT engineer. He was working in his lab one day, and this lab had a reputation for being haunted. And he started to feel very uneasy at one point. And he saw a figure out of the corner of his eyes, and when he turned to look, the figure had gone.
I've been there. It's happened to me before. Working in the lab late at night. Whoops, did I see something?
What's your explanation?
That it was in the lab late at night.
Overactive imagination.
Yep,
Tired.
We're very good at freaking ourselves out.
exactly.
That's probably what he figured. But the next day, he went to work with his sword, as you do,
What?
Yeah.
and it was a foil rather than whatever that is.
Oh.
And he was
And
working.
half.
He was working on the foil in his vice to get ready for a competition, and he noticed the foil was vibrating. And he moved the foil around, and he was able to calculate the vibration was at a frequency of 19 hertz, which is infrasound, below human audio. And he did some research into this sort of frequency, and he came across all sorts of documents from NASA and other people that say there's something strange about this frequency. It causes people to feel uneasy and uncomfortable. And he also found out that the resonant frequency of the human eyeball is about 19 hertz. So it could.
Wait, what? Oh,
So it could cause some sort of resonance in the human eyeball, creating this image that he saw. And he was eventually able to identify the source of this standing wave down to a badly installed ventilation fan. And so he had that repaired, and apparently the ghosts vanished and everyone started feeling happy again. So his theory is that infrasound is the source of hauntings.
So
infrasound. Okay.
I suppose that there's a kind of, I mean, I'm not sure whether I'd go as far as sort of infrasound sort of thing, but sounds just at the edge of your hearing, something, a noise in the background that you think you can hear, but you're not really sure about, can make you feel quite uncomfortable at times. And again, you're in a lab in the dark on your own, and there's something making you feel uncomfortable. I think your imagination can probably. So, I mean, I could probably accept that a fan in the corner of his office making a noise that made people feel uncomfortable caused them to imagine that there was something else making them feel uncomfortable, some sort of supernatural element to it. So repairing the fan could make that go away. I think there's definitely a level of plausibility there.
But there's a whole set of like separate experiments that you can do just isolating the phenomenon of infrasound. And my understanding is that it's ambiguous. There's like the experiments are, like potentially it's one of those phenomena where not everyone is susceptible. So there's a lot of noise in the signal.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they've done experiments where they pumped infrasound into concert halls, for example, while people were undergoing concerts, and they would report, there would be an increase in reports of feelings of unease at the time. As infrasound was being pumped in.
Is that because someone's going up to going, are you feeling uneasy?
No, I think it was like
I am now.
Like my understanding of the methodology of that one, it was a classical music concert. It was the same concert hall. It was a random mix of people in both, and then both sides were asked to survey how they felt. But like the results were like statistically different from each other, but there was not a lot of clear water between them. Like it was, they were not sort of like the two populations of responses were definitely still overlapping.
Yeah.
Someone in the Sheldon in the chat's brought up the idea that this relates to something called sick building syndrome. The idea, that there's something wrong with the place.
Yeah.
Yes. It has been linked to sick building syndrome.
Is it also one of the possible mechanisms invoked for explaining Havana syndrome too?
Probably everything's been thrown at Havana syndrome at some point. Tandy was called into a haunting in the vaults below Coventry Tourist Information Centre. No conflict of interest there. And he went down into the vaults and he found a 19 hertz standing wave in the vaults there, where these haunting apparitions had been reported.
But I could go around and find a 19 hertz wave if you set me off looking for one. Find it in my eyeballs.
This is a big issue. There doesn't seem to be any baseline into the experiment. He doesn't seem to have measured other places to see what happens there, non-haunted places.
Yeah, they have 19 hertz waves.
Yeah.
It could be a common thing. I don't know. So there's some evidence that it causes people to feel uncomfortable, but the idea of hallucinations seems a bit of a jump. And the idea of vibrating the eyeball causing a fully formed ghost to appear.
I mean, even in his own experience, he didn't see anything like that, did he? He saw something out the corner of his eye, and
which may have been the side of his glasses. He concluded.
Exactly. And so I can accept that these noises can make people feel uncomfortable and stuff like that. I was just looking it up, and there are apparently earbuds you can get to block infrasound. People who think wind turbines are causing people to get sick because of this. And apparently, and I feel that there's probably experiments you could do with that. Go to a haunted location and block people up with ears, and do they report haunted experiences? Because they can't hear the infrasound. I don't know. It's interesting, but I don't see how it connects fully to. I mean, yes, okay, you can. Let's say it vibrates your eyes and makes you see things. You're not going to see a Victorian child, or
No, but you could see those sort of fuzzy ethereal shape. Like I'm not thinking like full detail ghosts. I'm thinking like sort of Pac-Man ghost.
Or maybe you could get those floaters in your eyes. Maybe the vibration makes you more aware of them, and you're actually seeing something that's actually inside your eyeball.
Well, there's that whole thing about how like our brain's perception of reality is like a few milliseconds behind actual time, right? And so there's tons of like psychological, neurological reasons why we know, for example, we know that human beings can hallucinate. There are a variety of medical conditions that cause actual hallucinations. So if we're invoking Occam's razor, like, is it not more plausible that our imaginations / biology have misfired in this other circumstance too, when we know it can happen, in many, many people?
I mean, there's things like grief hallucinations where you lose a loved one, and
yeah,
I think that I'd have to look it up. I think it's something like 30% of people experience those. Who lose people they're very close to, and I think that accounts for why people think ghosts are real. And then all of these other things sort of come along and try to act as though I think there's it being various psychological reasons is the most.
I think that's the psychology and sociology are generally disrespected in the
yes, it's always looking for some physical.
They want the answer in biology or physics or
something
chemistry.
You can do maths with. Okay.
Something you can do maths with, and that's where a lot of these pseudoscientific theories seem to come from. Responding to the point in the chat about trying this in a quiet area, thankfully, Chris French did that in his haunt experiment. So as well as having the two EMF generators, he also had this infrasound generator in the corner. So he had another area of the room that was being affected by infrasound. And again, there was some overlap between the infrasound and the EMF. So if there was a combination of the two, and as I said, there were no significant results from his experiment. So infrasound is not looking like a promising explanation for at the moment. So the last theory I want to look at is electrostaging hypothesis. This comes from Albert Budden, a ufologist. What? And he seems to have just taken everything and thrown it together. So apparitions are hallucinations and projected place memories induced by exposure to electrical emissions, which he calls EMF fog, affecting specific parts of the brain. These can be augmented by awakened PK and ESP abilities or the Hutchinson effect.
What's the Hutchinson effect?
Oh, wow. It took me a while to track this one down. It's a bit obscure now. But there was this guy in, I think 1979, I tracked it down to. And he was working in his garage with all these various pieces of equipment, and he was able to, he released videos of, he was able to make objects float, he was able to make cans crush, he was able to make wood and metal fuse together, and he released these videos of what he achieved in his garage. Sadly, he was never able to produce these effects on demand or produce any sort of replicatable results. Yeah. But
So something you were saying there made me immediately wonder if we're assuming that ghosts are in some way related to electromagnetism and stuff like that. The question occurs to me of why are there not more ghost sightings now than there were in the past when we are, I mean, sitting here right now, my laptop is connected to the Wi-Fi, so I am being washed over with electromagnetism in some way, and we all are all the time. So why? Oh, yeah, like I can see a ghost right now. Case proved. You would think that you'd have more sightings of ghosts, but it seems, I mean, maybe it's just my personal experience, but it seems that ghost sightings seem to be a thing that happened more in the past and not so much now.
Do we have any data on
Yeah, I don't know if we do it,
that we can use longitudinally?
I don't have that.
Or, yeah, I'm not putting on the spot here. But...
I'm going to Google something. What can I Google?
I'm already Googling.
Ghost sighting.
Ghost sightings.
Per capita? Per square meter? I don't know what units are appropriate.
Relating to EMF, I know Richard Wiseman did a couple of ghost hunts where he measured EMF and see if it correlated with where people saw ghosts. And I know when he did Hampton Court Palace, he found there was some sort of correlation between these weak complex magnetic fields and where people would see ghosts. And then he did another one in the Edinburgh vaults, where he found no correlation with EMF, and instead he found correlation with other factors like the size of the cavern and the how badly lit it was.
You don't say. Bad lighting? I'm astonished.
Bad lighting apparently correlates quite well with ghost sightings.
And that is a type of electromagnetic radiation. So I think we've proven it.
Right.
Anyone?
Ghosts are real. They're from another dimension, and they're electromagnetic.
And you can see them if you're doing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm convinced.
Yeah.
My work here is done.
Yes, exactly.
So we're disbanding Cambridge Skeptics.
Yep. We're going to become ghost hunters.
Professional ghost hunters now.
Yeah.
Cambridge ghost hunters. How about that?
Oh, my fingers are in vain. I'm ruined the illusion.
Ghost hunters.
Okay, here's a question for you guys on the topic of ghosts. Sam and I went to Scotland a few years ago, and we stayed at an old hotel in the Highlands, and
ghosts. It was definitely ghosts.
They had a hotel ghost tour, and we went on it, and it was what you would expect. There was interesting stories about the history of the hotel, and that was quite cute. And then at one point they're like, "Do you want to see pictures of the ghost?" And it was very clearly the camera strap had gotten in the way of the flash, and that was it.
They did a ghost tour in Ely that I went to, and I thought they did a brilliant job of it, because basically they had actors dressed up in Victorian gear who would just come out of a corner and walk past you without acknowledging you, cool. As they were telling you the ghost story and stuff. And
so on that subject,
I'm in favour of dinosaur ghosts still there.
Gordon Cornell, who I mentioned earlier, who were the guys that shook the house apart, they decided to experiment on whether people would see ghosts. They put on a white sheet and hung around Cambridge city centre at night. And most people just didn't notice them.
Because if it was during term time, whatever.
So they hung around the backs for a while, nobody saw them. They moved into a graveyard that was more visible, nobody saw them.
Or everyone ignored them, maybe?
Yeah. So the people that did see them just thought they were weird and ignored them.
Yeah.
Students doing something.
Yeah, exactly.
So we've been to Cambridge. We know what it's like.
I'm pretty sure I saw a guy at 7 a.m. on Saturday morning wearing a Kermit the Frog costume, cycling across Parker's Piece.
Yeah. Ghost, definitely a ghost.
Gotta do what you gotta do.
Did he have a top hat on?
He did not.
No.
He did
All
not.
right, there
Yeah.
probably wasn't a ghost.
But it wasn't a Sunday, so
It wasn't a
Oh.
so he
So
couldn't possibly have been wearing a top hat.
because they weren't noticed, they decided to go somewhere really visible. So they walked across the front of a cinema screen while it was showing an X-rated film.
They showed those at Cambridge?
They did back then, apparently.
Woo!
And still practically nobody noticed them.
Well, they had other things to be concentrating on.
I think this was during the previews rather than.
They had previews. What do they preview?
But yeah, the few people did see them. One of them claimed to have seen a woman in a white dress. One of them claimed to have seen a polar bear walking in front of the screen. So.
Amazing.
Was there a gorilla when they were playing basketball? That's the important question.
Yeah, girl playing basketball.
So yeah, maybe there are hundreds of ghosts out there and we're just not seeing them.
Yeah, just nobody cares.
Let me just check. No, none in here. None in this room. It's confirmed.
Right. Well, that was awesome, Chris. Thank you very
That's
much.
really cool. Oh yeah, but on the topic of like ghost tours, my question is, where do you guys feel ethically about paying money for a ghost tour? Because I'm a bit like, on the one hand, I'm like, oh well, I love learning about like history, and quite often these tours have like a history perspective, and it's an interesting sort of experience. So I'm really happy for that element of it. But on the other hand, if they're quite like credulous in kind of the pseudoscience part, I'm less comfortable supporting that.
I think a lot of the time the people doing it, it's just entertainment. They tell a good story, they dress up in costumes, they get their friends to do spooky things so that people enjoy it. It's very much, I think, most people who go on there,
like we all know it's not real.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas the psychic, I think, is a slightly different.
Yeah.
Like,
I was reading about this the last couple of weeks, and I came up a lot of interviews with curators of haunted houses, and it does seem to be there's two schools of thought. One group thinks it's good for advertising and bringing in tourists, and the other group thinks it's just complete insult to history and you shouldn't do it.
It's I would add that in I can't remember what he titled it, but Sam Harris has a short essay on lying. He titled it "Lying." But in
literary genius.
He's well, it's actually really short. It's only like 12 pages or something, but it goes on about lying, and he comes up with what I think is a better definition of lying than just not the truth, which is to knowingly mislead someone who expects honest communication. That is better. It allows for the, oh well, technically I said blah blah blah. No. You gave an impression. It was very clear that was the impression that was given. That's a lie, even if all of the words you technically said were true. And it also allows for comedians and actors and people providing experiences where it is an experience that is being provided. So in this case, nobody expects a ghost tour to be real. And those that do expect it to be real probably would be perfectly happy with what was provided to them. Like, you're not misleading anyone here, really. Whereas psychics are misleading someone. So, yeah, that's my hot take.
I was speaking to a blue badge guide here in Cambridge a few years ago, and he said he used to do the ghost tours here. And he said he stopped doing them because Cambridge ghosts are so boring.
I've got a book somewhere.
Just no interesting stories about Cambridge ghosts, apparently. So he gave up with that.
But just make some up. I mean,
exactly. He wasn't willing to do that, you see.
Oh, Eric.
Is that a ghost dinosaur?
That's a ghost dinosaur.
I drew a picture of a ghost dinosaur for Shelton.
Oh, I sent him a picture, a link to a T-shirt that has a ghost dinosaur.
Oh, that's pretty good.
It's quite cute.
So,
anyway,
but yeah,
we've been going on for an hour and a half.
So. Yeah, I think we're good.
We have no plan for next time. This is why we have no idea how to end this.
Yeah, we're bonus content this time. Next time, there is no plan.
Yeah, if anyone wants to talk to us, please get in touch.
Yeah, so as it stands at the moment, we're not going to be back in 2 weeks. Erica and Sam are off on their honeymoon, so that's very exciting.
With each other.
With each other, yes, not separately. And so, yeah, we probably aren't going to do one in 2 weeks' time unless me and Chris can find some exciting people to join us at very short notice and come up with a topic. So we'll probably be back in 4 weeks' time when we will talk about something skeptically related.
To be determined.
Yes.
Unlike this discussion, which
Yes.
I bowed to peer pressure and I finally got a cat. I hope you're happy now.
Nice. My one's been scratching at the door for most of this. So,
Yeah.
Amazing. Cool.
Anyway.
Well, see you guys in 4 weeks.
Enjoy your honeymoon.
We will.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.